Rain drummed against the windshield as Naomi, née Walker, pulled her unmarked truck into a diagonal space on Main Street. The Pioneer Diner glowed amber through the October drizzle, its neon sign flickering EST 1947 in cursive that hadn't been updated since Carter was president. She killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening to the patter fade to silence, mentally cataloging the street. 3 pickups, a county cruiser, 1 sedan with dealer plates. No foot traffic. Exactly what her informant had described. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. She stepped out, boots hitting wet pavement, and locked the door with a deliberate click. Her jacket concealed the wire taped beneath her collar, and the Park Service badge stayed hidden in her wallet. Tonight she was just another tired traveler looking for coffee and pie. The undercover sweep on the protected wildlife trafficking case had led her through 6 counties, and every breadcrumb pointed here, to this diner, to these members' nights that locals wouldn't explain on the record. The bell above the door chimed as she entered. Conversation died like someone had cut the power. A dozen faces turned her way, all white, all suddenly interested in their coffee cups or the rain-streaked windows. The air smelled of burnt coffee, frying oil, and something sharper underneath, like anxiety given scent. Behind the counter, Evelyn Pierce, the owner, wore a floral apron over a church committee smile. Her eyes, however, were ice. "We're hosting a private function tonight, miss. I'm afraid we're closed to walk-ins." Naomi glanced at the open sign still glowing in the window. Sign says otherwise. Officer Cole Maddox unfolded himself from a stool near the pie case, his uniform crisp despite the late hour. A German shepherd, Archer, sat at heel, alert but calm. Maddox's hand rested on his belt, fingers drumming a pattern that spoke of rehearsed dominance. "Ma'am, you need to leave. This is a members-only event." Naomi kept her voice level, her hands visible. "Members of what, exactly? I don't see any posted membership criteria. Public accommodation laws require—" "This is a white-only club." Maddox stepped closer, crowding her space. His jaw was tight, shoulders squared like he was performing for an audience. "We have the right to refuse service." The room held its breath. Naomi felt the weight of every stare, the pressure of a script she'd been handed without consent. She had trained for ambushes in Kandahar, had held fire discipline under mortar rounds, but this casual cruelty wrapped in small-town entitlement still made her blood run cold before training took over. "I'd like to see that policy in writing," she said, pulling out her phone, "and I'll need the owner's name for my report." Evelyn moved fast for a woman in her 60s, flipping the door sign to "Private Function" with a practiced flick. She whispered something to Maddox, her smile never wavering for the room. In the service window behind the counter, Ruby Lane, 17 and saving for community college, lifted her second phone from her apron pocket. Her hands shook slightly as she framed the shot, Maddox crowding the black woman in the doorway, his fingers now gripping the stranger's sleeve, the woman's hands raised and empty. Ruby's thumb found the record button. Naomi narrated for the mic hidden in her collar, her voice barely above a whisper. "Officer is making physical contact without stated cause. Requesting written policy, no response provided." She logged the timestamp mentally, 8:47 p.m. Across the room, a bearded man in a Carhartt jacket, Travis Boone, slid an envelope across a corner booth to Evelyn's nephew. A burlap-wrapped parcel sat between them, and Naomi caught the edge of a Forestry Service brand burned into the fabric. Her pulse quickened. There it was, the freight she'd been tracking. Maddox tugged her sleeve harder. "Outside, now, we need to chat." Naomi gently pulled her arm free, stepped to the counter, and placed a $5 bill on the Formica. "Coffee, please. Black. To go." The room exhaled in confusion. Evelyn's smile cracked at the edges. Maddox's face flushed red. But Naomi had established lawful presence, made a purchase, created a transaction. She was no longer a trespasser in their narrative. Ruby poured the coffee with trembling hands and passed the cup across the counter. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and Naomi saw the phone still recording in the girl's other hand, half hidden by the service window frame. "Thank you," Naomi said, and meant it for more than the coffee. As Maddox grabbed her elbow and steered her toward the door, Ruby's thumb was already moving, sending the video into the night. The diner's neon buzzed overhead, casting sickly yellow light across the wet pavement. Maddox positioned himself between Naomi and her truck, arms crossed, Archer sitting rigid at his side. Behind him, Deputy Erin Blake stood with her hands clasped, fresh out of the academy and visibly drowning in the gulf between what her training manual said and what her field officer was doing. Identification, now. Maddox's voice carried across the empty street. Naomi kept the coffee cup in her left hand, her right empty and visible. Am I being detained or arrested? Don't get smart with me, ID. I'm a federal employee off duty. Unless I'm under arrest, I'm declining to identify my agency at this time. She kept her tone neutral, clinical. Every word was being recorded, both by her wire and by Erin's body cam, which Naomi had clocked the moment they exited the diner. Inside, faces crowded the window. Across the street, Mason Hale, local podcaster and self-appointed town chronicler, slowed his walk to his car and pulled out his phone. He had a nose for conflict, and this was the kind of small-town theater that fed his audience.
Maddox stepped closer, invading her space with practiced aggression. You're being real difficult for someone who just wants coffee. I'm requesting a supervisor. Naomi kept her eyes on his hands, tracking his center of gravity. My concern is that this interaction lacks legal foundation. Erin shifted her weight, and Naomi saw the flicker of recognition cross the young deputy's face. She knew the law. She knew this was wrong. But she was frozen between knowing and acting, between the academy's clean lines and the ugly compromises the uniform was demanding. Maddox turned to Archer, his tone shifting to command mode. Seek! The dog rose, ears forward, but his body language was off. There was hesitation in his posture, a whine building in his throat. Maddox repeated the command, sharper this time, his hand moving in a coached gesture that Naomi recognized from her own tactical training. This wasn't a natural alert. This was theater. Naomi spoke clearly into her collar mic, the line silent but recording. Pioneer has freight tonight. 3 words. Captain Owen Keating, monitoring from 2 counties away, would understand. The case was live, the diner was active, and Naomi was now a witness under duress. Behind her, the diner's back door opened with a metallic clack. Boots on gravel, an engine turning over in the alley. The freight was moving. Evelyn killed the lights in the rear dining room, and the window audience began to disperse, suddenly very interested in their checks. Mason posted to his podcast feed from across the street. White-only night at the Pioneer? Red Hollow, we need to talk. Maddox's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, and something shifted in his expression. The video was already out there, spreading faster than he could contain it. But he'd committed to the script now, and pride wouldn't let him walk it back. You need to leave Red Hollow, tonight. Naomi met his eyes. I'll be going when I'm ready, officer. Have a good evening. She walked to her truck, unhurried, every step measured. Erin's body cam captured Maddox's clenched jaw, Archer's confused whine, and the moment the officer tried to coach another alert that never came. As Naomi opened her truck door, her phone vibrated, an airdrop request from Ruby. She accepted. The photo loaded. A laminated members list, names in careful columns, dues and dates noted in the margin. 23 names. Maddox was third from the top. Naomi forwarded it to Keating before she even started the engine. Naomi parked by the river, where the water ran black under a moonless sky, and the nearest streetlight was a quarter-mile behind her. She cracked the windows and let the sound of the current wash over her, a grounding technique Dr. Taryn Cooper had taught her after a particularly brutal deposition 2 years ago. 5 breaths, count the sounds, name 3 things you can see. Ripples on water, steering wheel, dashboard-like. Her hands had stopped shaking. She pulled out her encrypted phone and began uploading the dictated notes from her collar mic, time-stamped and tagged with GPS coordinates. The file transfer crawled across a secure connection, and while she waited, she cross-referenced the names from Ruby's photo against her case database. Boone, Travis, flagged in an illegal timber seizure 2023, charges dropped. Maddox, Cole, complained against twice, both complaints withdrawn. Delaney, Henry, no priors, but listed as a property co-signer on a storage unit tied to a prior artifact theft. The phone buzzed again. Captain Keating. You intact? Bruised ego, clean evidence chain. Good. I'm drafting a preservation notice for their CCTV, dispatch logs, and Maddox's body cam. Judge Whitaker's clerk is standing by. Get somewhere safe and stay off social media. Copy. Another call rolled in. Pastor Leon Brooks. She'd met him once during a community wildfire safety seminar, a former Army chaplain who ran the Red Hollow Community House with the efficiency of a logistics officer and the compassion of someone who'd held too many hands in too many field hospitals. Agent Walker. I saw the video. I have 3 spare rooms, a rotating volunteer watch, and a lawyer on speed dial. Do you need a safe place? I appreciate it, Pastor. I'm mobile tonight, but I may have witnesses who need shelter. I'll make the calls. No one gets left hanging, not on my watch. Naomi thanked him and ended the call, feeling the knot in her chest loosen slightly. Brooks was building a net while she built a case. That's how you change a town, one choice at a time, one person deciding that silence was more expensive than speech. Her phone lit up again. Mason Hale, requesting an interview. She drafted a neutral statement, 2 sentences. I'm a federal employee conducting lawful business. Public accommodation laws apply to all citizens equally. She hit send and blocked follow-ups. Back at the diner, Evelyn Pierce stood in her darkened kitchen, phone pressed to her ear. The contact name on her screen read simply, TB. We have a problem, she said. I'm handling it, Travis Boone replied from a truck cab 50 miles west. Keep the books clean. I'll move the rest tomorrow. Tomorrow might be too late. The line went quiet. Then we move tonight. Naomi's phone buzzed one more time. An unknown number, a local area code. Off duty, no phones. Truck stop on Route 9, 1 hour. E. Aaron Blake was ready to talk. The church fellowship hall smelled of old coffee and lemon furniture polish. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting flat institutional light across folding chairs and a metal table. Pastor Brooks had unlocked the side door without a word, handed Naomi a bottle of water, and stationed himself by the window where he could see the parking lot. Aaron Blake arrived 20 minutes late, checking her mirrors 3 times before she parked. She wore civilian clothes, jeans and a university hoodie, and she looked younger without the uniform, more like the criminal justice student who'd graduated online while caring for her father than the deputy who'd frozen on that sidewalk.
She sat across from Naomi and placed a thumb drive on the table between them like a grenade with the pin already pulled. Body cam backup, Aaron said, her voice raw, and dispatch timestamps. They don't match what Maddox is going to say happened. Naomi didn't touch the drive yet. What did he tell you to do? Clean up my notes, change unlawful order to verbal warning, mark you as non-compliant and hostile? Aaron's hands twisted together. I froze out there. I knew it was wrong, but I froze. You're here now, Naomi said. That's what matters. Aaron pulled out a folded paper, her handwriting cramped and urgent. I wrote down everything I remember, exact words, times. I'll sign it, but I need to know, what does accountability actually look like? Because I'm about to lose every friend I have on the force. Pastor Brooks stepped forward, his presence steady. I'll witness the signature, and you'll have a place at the community house as long as you need it. Naomi picked up the thumb drive and plugged it into her laptop. The video loaded, Maddox's body cam perspective. She scrubbed to the sidewalk interaction. Archer sat, alert but uncertain. Maddox's voice, off camera. "Seek! Come on, boy! Seek!" A pause. "Find it!" The dog whined. Maddox's hand moved into frame, tapping his own pocket, a coached gesture. Archer barked, once, confused. "Good boy. Alert." The audio was damning. The dog hadn't alerted to anything. He'd been manipulated into a false positive, and the discomfort was audible in his whine. Aaron's voice on the recording, quiet. "Sir, should I note the alert in my log?" Maddox, irritated. "Just write K9 indication, subject uncooperative. Keep it simple." Naomi stopped the playback. She looked at Aaron, who was staring at the table, tears tracking silently down her face. "I'm so sorry," Aaron whispered. "You're doing the right thing," Naomi said. She meant it. This was the hardest kind of courage, the kind that cost you your tribe. "I'm going to walk you through witness safety protocols. You'll need to prepare for retaliation, but you won't be alone." Aaron signed the statement. Brooks signed as witness. Naomi photographed the document and the thumb drive contents and uploaded everything to a time-stamped server. As Aaron stood to leave, Naomi noticed a screenshot on the deputy's phone, left open on the table. A text thread. Chief Walter Briggs's name at the top. "Talk to Blake. Make sure her story matches. This can't blow up." Naomi photographed that, too. The blue wall was cracking, and now they had the sound of it breaking. Judge Marlo Whitaker's chambers were oak-paneled and cold, the kind of cold that had nothing to do with temperature. She sat behind her desk, reading glasses perched on her nose, reviewing the evidence packet Naomi had delivered at dawn. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd argued in scattered knots. Some held signs defending tradition, others demanded accountability. A news van from Charleston idled at the curb. Naomi stood in full uniform now, badge displayed, Park Service credentials laid out beside the laptop, playing Aaron's body cam audio. Captain Owen Keating stood beside her, his Australian accent softened by years in American parks, but still audible in the vowels. "Your Honor," Naomi said, "we're requesting emergency preservation orders for the Pioneer Diner's CCTV system, all Red Hollow PD body cam footage from October 10th, CAD dispatch logs, and financial records related to the diner's membership rosters." Judge Whitaker removed her glasses. "Officer Maddox is claiming this is a civil rights shakedown. Chief Briggs is calling it federal overreach." "Then the records will exonerate them," Keating said smoothly, "unless there's something in those records they'd prefer destroyed." Whitaker's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. She'd grown up in Red Hollow, had watched classmates sorted into those the system protected and those it ground down. She'd spent 30 years on the bench trying to level a playing field that kept tilting. She signed the preservation orders with swift, precise strokes. "I'm also issuing a limited no-contact order protecting Ruby Lane and Deputy Blake. If anything happens to these witnesses, Chief Briggs will answer to me personally." "Appreciated, Your Honor," Naomi said. "Don't thank me yet. You're about to make a lot of powerful people very uncomfortable." Whitaker handed over the signed orders. "Sheriff Tom Redding will serve these. He's county, not town, and his evidence texts are clean. Briggs doesn't get to touch this chain of custody." As they exited chambers, Keating's phone buzzed. He read the message and showed Naomi the screen. A text from Briggs to Evelyn Pierce, captured from the mirrored surveillance line. "Stall. I'll handle." "He's moving," Naomi said. "So are we," Keating replied. By noon, Sheriff Redding's convoy rolled up to the Pioneer Diner. Evelyn Pierce stood in the doorway, her smile finally gone, replaced with something harder and more honest. Behind her in the kitchen, the acrid smell of burned paper drifted from the alley, where a metal drum still smoldered. Naomi pulled on latex gloves and stepped inside. The kitchen was spotless, too spotless. Industrial-grade clean, the kind that erased fingerprints in history. But above the walk-in cooler, one ceiling tile sat slightly askew. She looked up, and Sheriff Redding handed her a step stool. "Let's see what they were in such a hurry to hide," Naomi said, and reached for the tile. The ledgers were waiting. The ceiling tile came away in Naomi's gloved hands, releasing a cascade of dust and the papery smell of old receipts. She handed the tile down to Sheriff Redding and reached into the cavity, fingers finding the edge of something wrapped in plastic. 2 ledgers, bound with rubber bands, and a Ziploc bag containing a thumb drive. She pulled them out carefully, mindful of chain of custody, and stepped down from the stool.
"Photography first," she said to the evidence tech, a methodical woman named Garrison, who'd already documented the burned paper in the alley and the suspiciously clean kitchen surfaces. Garrison shot the wrapped package from 6 angles before Naomi opened it on the stainless steel prep counter. The first ledger was benign, a public-facing record of daily receipts, supplier invoices, and payroll. The handwriting was neat, the columns balanced. It was the kind of book you'd show a health inspector or a casual auditor, the kind that said, "Everything here is ordinary, nothing to see." The second ledger told a different story entirely. The pages were dense with initials, dates, and figures that didn't match any menu pricing Naomi had ever seen. TB, 18 units, $4,200, appeared 3 times in September alone. Heritage Fund, dues collected, $890, ran down the right margin in careful notation. Weights were recorded in kilograms, not pounds, and the items were listed as art, iron, and timber in rotating abbreviations that anyone with half a brain could decode as code words for something else. Naomi photographed each page, the shutter clicking in steady rhythm. Beside her, Redding made notes in his own log, documenting the time, location, and condition of discovery. His face was stone, but his jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. "This goes back 3 years, Naomi said, flipping toward the beginning. October 2022. That's when the Heritage Club formally started taking dues. That's when Maddox made senior patrolman and when Briggs became chief." The thumb drive yielded its secrets slowly, each file named with cryptic efficiency. Shipment dates Q3 opened to reveal a spreadsheet cross-referencing delivery windows with personnel schedules, truck manifests, and GPS coordinates that Naomi recognized immediately as National Forest Service roads, fire breaks, and logging sites that had been closed to commercial operation for a decade. Roster 2025 was a membership list that included not just names, but also dues paid, vehicles owned, and a column labeled active, with check marks beside Maddox, Boone, and 11 others. But the most damning file was labeled simply routes. It was a map, hand-drawn and then scanned, showing a pipeline from the forest through the diner to river warehouses with notations for safe stops and clean corridors, law enforcement shifts marked in red. Every Tuesday and Friday night, the map showed, between 8 p.m. and midnight, there was a 2-hour window when certain patrol routes went unmonitored, when certain roads had no eyes. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Naomi's phone buzzed. Captain Keating. Boone's trucks moving. River warehouse. Go now. She looked at Redding. "How fast can you secure this scene?" "Garrison stays. I'll leave 2 deputies, but if you're going after Boone tonight, you'll need backup." Redding keyed his radio. "All units code yellow. Converge on River Warehouse District, County Road 12. Federal operation in progress. Maintain perimeter. Do not engage without sheriff authorization." Evelyn Pierce stood in the dining room doorway, her lawyer, a sharp-eyed man in an expensive suit, whispering urgently in his ear. When Naomi passed, carrying the evidence bags, Evelyn's composure finally cracked. "You don't know what you're doing," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "This town takes care of its own. You're just an outsider with a badge and a grudge." Naomi stopped, met her eyes, and spoke with the kind of calm that comes from having faced actual enemies, not playground bullies in aprons. "Ma'am, I'm reading you the preservation order Judge Whitaker signed this morning. All financial records, digital and physical, all communication devices, all membership materials are now evidence in a federal investigation. Tampering with, destroying, or concealing any such materials constitutes obstruction of justice and carries a penalty of up to 20 years in federal prison. Your attorney can explain the rest." She handed Evelyn a copy of the order, signed and sealed,
and walked out into the autumn morning where the light was sharp and clean, nothing like the diner's murky interior. The convoy formed quickly, Naomi's truck leading, Redding's units flanking, and 2 Park Service investigators Keating had scrambled from the regional office, bringing up the rear. They moved fast along the river road, past shuttered mills and old tobacco barns leaning into collapse, to the corrugated warehouses that once stored grain and now stored secrets. Fog crawled off the water in thick bands, turning the world gray and uncertain. Naomi pulled to the shoulder a quarter-mile out, grabbed her go-bag and checked her sidearm. Redding joined her, his own weapon holstered but ready. His radio crackled with position reports from his perimeter teams. 3 trucks confirmed, 1 back to the loading dock, 2 subjects visible, no sign of Maddox yet. "Hold position, wait for the warrant service," Redding ordered. Naomi pulled the folded warrant from her jacket, freshly signed by Judge Whitaker an hour ago based on the ledgers and the thumb drive. It authorized search and seizure of any materials related to trafficking of protected wildlife, timber, or cultural artifacts. It named Travis Boone, the Heritage Club, and any associated entities. It was airtight. They approached on foot, keeping to the tree line, boots silent on wet leaves. The warehouse loomed ahead, rust bleeding through old paint, windows dark except for a single security light that buzzed and flickered. Inside, voices echoed, metal scraping on concrete, the beep of a forklift in reverse. Naomi signaled the team into position, 2 at the front door, 2 at the vehicle bay, Redding and herself at the personnel entrance on the south side. She tested the handle. Unlocked. Sloppy. They entered low and quiet, weapons drawn but pointed safe, moving through a darkened office space that smelled of mildew and diesel. The voices grew louder, clearer. Boone's folksy drawl. "Last load tonight, boys, then we're dark till this blows over." Another voice, younger, uncertain. "What if they come here?" "They won't. Briggs says the feds don't have jurisdiction on county property. We're clean." Naomi smiled grimly. Briggs had lied to his own people, either out of ignorance or desperation. Park Service had jurisdiction anywhere federal law applied, and trafficked timber from national forests made this very much their house. She pushed through the door into the main warehouse bay, and 24 faces turned toward her. Crates were stacked floor to ceiling, some stamped with museum inventory codes, others with Forestry Service tags. A pile of rough-cut hardwood sat on pallets, the growth rings visible even from across the room, the kind of old-growth timber that had been protected since the 90s. On a shelf near the loading dock sat a small black box with an antenna, the kind of signal jammer used to knock out cheap security cameras at small businesses. Travis Boone stood in the center of it all, wearing his folksy grin and a private security badge that meant exactly nothing in the face of a federal warrant. He spread his hands wide, performing innocence. "Agent Walker, what a surprise. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." Naomi held up the warrant, her voice carrying across the warehouse with parade ground clarity. "Travis Boone, this is a federal search and seizure warrant authorized by Judge Marla Whitaker for this location and all contents therein. You and your associates are to step away from the crates and keep your hands visible." Boone's smile never wavered, but his eyes went cold. "You're making a big mistake. You don't belong here. You don't understand how things work, and you're going to regret sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." The sentence died as tires screeched outside. A truck door slammed, boots on gravel, running. Officer Cole Maddox burst through the vehicle bay, off duty, off jurisdiction, and wildly out of his depth. "This is a county matter. You need to stand down." Sheriff Redding stepped forward, his voice flat and final. "Maddox, you're not on duty, you're not in your jurisdiction, and you're interfering with a federal warrant. Get out, or I'll arrest you myself." The room held its breath, 24 men frozen between 2 futures, wondering which side of history they wanted to be photographed on. Archer wasn't with Maddox this time, left at home, spared from being used as a prop one more time. Naomi walked calmly to the nearest crate, pried it open with a crowbar Garrison handed her, and pulled out a carved wooden bowl wrapped in tissue. She turned it over, found the tiny accession number inked on the base and photographed it against the crate's shipping label. This is Smithsonian property, reported stolen from a traveling exhibit in 2023. She met Boone's eyes. You were right about one thing. I don't belong here. But then again, neither does any of this. And with that, the warehouse became a crime scene. The warehouse had become an orchestrated chaos of documentation and discovery. Evidence technicians moved between crates like archaeologists at a dig site, each item photographed in place before being logged, tagged, and sealed. Naomi worked methodically through the inventory, cross-referencing stolen property reports against the accession numbers she found stamped, etched, or inked onto artifacts that had no business being in a corrugated warehouse on the edge of Red Hollow, West Virginia. A ceremonial pipe from the Cherokee Nation, reported missing from a North Carolina cultural center in 2024. A collection of Civil War-era buttons and buckles lifted from a battlefield preservation site. Fossilized specimens that belonged in university collections, their catalog numbers still visible beneath layers of bubble wrap and willful ignorance. Each piece represented not just theft, but erasure. History stolen and commodified, turned into poker chips for men who wrapped their greed in the language of heritage and belonging. The timber told its own story. Naomi ran her hand across the growth rings of a cut section, counting backward through centuries. Old-growth hardwood, black walnut and white oak, the kind that didn't exist anymore outside protected groves, the kind that federal law had shielded since the ecosystem collapse of the early 90s. Each board was worth thousands in the black market, sold to custom furniture makers and wealthy collectors who asked no questions about provenance as long as the grain was tight and the story was romantic. Travis Boone sat on an overturned bucket, his folksy swagger finally exhausted, replaced by the flat-eyed calculation of a man tallying his options and finding them all expensive. His private security badge lay on the concrete floor where Redding had made him remove it, a prop that worked in small-town disputes but meant nothing in the face of federal warrants and timber with radiocarbon dates. You think you're changing something. Boone's voice carried that particular strain of bitterness that comes from watching a sure thing dissolve. You think this matters, but there's always another pipeline, another buyer, another town that needs money more than it needs your rules. Naomi didn't look up from the artifact she was documenting, a woven basket so old and fragile that it crumbled slightly at the edges. You're probably right, but tonight, this pipeline is closed, and the people who trusted you to keep it running are about to learn what happens when the bottom drops out.
Redding's radio crackled. Sheriff, we have incoming. Single vehicle, approaching fast from the North Access Road. Description? Black SUV, county plates. Looks like Chief Briggs. Naomi and Redding exchanged glances. This was the moment they'd both anticipated, the point where institutional protection either held or collapsed under its own corruption. Briggs was coming to salvage what he could, to assert jurisdiction he didn't have, to perform authority for an audience that was rapidly losing faith in the performance. The SUV skidded to a stop outside the vehicle bay, door slamming with theatrical force. Chief Walter Briggs entered in full uniform, his face the color of old brick, his hand resting on his sidearm in a gesture that was equal parts threat and habit. He was 55 and political, a man who'd survived 3 mayors by keeping scandals quiet and maintaining the useful fiction that Red Hollow policed itself just fine without outside interference. Sheriff Redding, you're operating in my jurisdiction without notification. This is a serious breach of protocol. Briggs's voice was pitched for the room, for the workers who stood frozen between crates, for Maddox who hovered near the loading dock like a lieutenant waiting for orders that would restore the natural order of things. Redding pulled a folded document from his jacket, the same motion Naomi had used with the warrant, and held it up for Briggs to see. Federal warrant, signed by Judge Whitaker. Park Service has primary jurisdiction on any case involving protected federal lands or trafficked federal property. You want to dispute that, Chief? You can call the judge yourself. But right now, you're interfering with an active operation, and I strongly suggest you step outside before you make this worse for yourself.
Briggs's face cycled through several expressions, anger giving way to calculation, giving way to something that looked almost like fear. He'd been counting on the usual channels, the usual favors, the usual ability to make inconvenient truths disappear into filing cabinets and lost paperwork. But Judge Whittaker had cut those channels, and Redding had chosen documentation over loyalty, and now the machinery Briggs had relied on was grinding him instead of protecting him. "You're making a mistake," Briggs said, but the conviction had leaked out of his voice, replaced by the hollow sound of a man reciting lines he no longer believed. Naomi stepped forward, her badge catching the overhead light. "Chief Briggs, I have a question for you. This morning you sent a text message to Evelyn Pierce that read, 'Stall, I'll handle.' What exactly were you planning to handle? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you were coordinating the destruction of evidence in a federal investigation, which constitutes obstruction of justice under Title 18, Section 1519. The room went silent, except for the hum of the overhead lights and the distant sound of the river moving through the darkness outside. One of the workers, a young man in a Carhartt jacket who'd been unloading crates when the agents arrived, quietly set down the crowbar he'd been holding and stepped away from the timber pile, a small act of self-preservation that signaled which way the wind was blowing. Briggs opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I want my attorney." "Smart choice," Redding said. He nodded to two of his deputies who approached with handcuffs held ready but not yet deployed, giving Briggs the dignity of compliance. "Walter Briggs, you're being detained pending investigation of obstruction of justice and conspiracy to traffic in stolen property. You have the right to remain silent." As Redding recited the Miranda warning, Maddox finally moved, stepping forward with his hand extended as if he could physically stop what was happening through sheer force of denial. "Chief, this is insane. Tell them this is a mistake." Briggs looked at Maddox with something close to pity. "Shut up, Cole. Just shut up and get yourself a lawyer." The handcuffs clicked into place, and Briggs was led out through the vehicle bay, past the crates of stolen history, past the pallets of protected timber, past the small black signal jammer that had let them operate in manufactured darkness for 3 years. As his SUV was secured by evidence techs, Naomi returned to her documentation, photographing the last of the artifacts while Garrison compiled the master inventory list that would become an exhibit in court. She found the item she'd been looking for near the back of the warehouse, wrapped in canvas and labeled only with a date and a set of initials. She unwrapped it carefully, revealing a piece of fossilized wood, cross-section polished to show the growth rings in exquisite detail. River teeth, they were called in the trade. Ancient logs preserved in riverbed sediment and turned to stone over millennia, each ring a record of seasons long extinct. She photographed it from every angle, documented its dimensions and condition, and traced the faint catalog number that connected it to a state park visitor center that had reported a break-in 2 years ago. The thieves had taken 3 specimens. This was the first to surface. Naomi held the stone in her gloved hands for a moment, feeling its weight, thinking about time and preservation, about the difference between heritage and theft, about how some people built museums to protect the past, while others smashed the cases and sold the pieces. She wrapped it again, sealed it in an evidence bag, and added it to the growing pile of recovered history. Outside, the fog was lifting, and the first edge of dawn painted the river gold. The warehouse lights looked sickly and false against the coming daylight, and the men who'd built their sense of belonging on exclusion and exploitation stood in small clusters, separated by deputies, no longer sure which story they'd be telling their families when they finally went home.
Naomi checked her phone, a text from Captain Keating. Judge Whittaker signed an emergency order. Briggs's office and personal devices are being imaged now. We have him. Another text, this one from an unknown number, arrived as she read Keating's message. The area code was local. She opened it. He's planning something tonight. Heritage fundraiser at the diner. Big crowd. Be careful. R. Ruby Lane was still watching, still documenting, still choosing courage over comfort. Naomi typed a quick reply. Stay safe. We're moving.
She pocketed the phone and looked at the warehouse one last time, at the evidence of a pipeline that had run for years under the cover of nostalgia and manufactured tradition. They'd closed this node, arrested these men, recovered these artifacts, but Boone had been right about one thing. There were other towns, other diners, other officers willing to look the other way for the right price. This was maintenance work, not a final victory. But maintenance mattered. Every pipeline closed, every ledger seized, every witness protected was a choice, a small insistence that laws applied to everyone, that belonging couldn't be built on exclusion, that heritage was something you protected, not something you weaponized. She turned to Redding. "We need to move on the diner tonight. If they're planning a consolidation, it's now or never." Redding nodded. "I'll get Judge Whitaker on the line. Time to finish this." The ranger station command room had been transformed into a war room overnight. Whiteboards covering every available wall surface, each one mapping a different thread of the conspiracy. Naomi stood before the largest board, dry erase marker in hand, drawing connections between names, dates, and dollar amounts with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent years tracking networks through fragmentary intelligence and partial testimony. The Heritage Fund sat at the center, a hub with spokes radiating outward. Diner dues flowed in from 23 members, each paying between $30 and $50 monthly, amounts small enough to seem innocuous on any individual bank statement. Those dues pooled into an account registered to a nonprofit called the Red Hollow Historical Preservation Society, a shell organization with no website, no public events, and no tax filings that would survive even casual scrutiny. From there, the money split into 3 streams. The first went to what Briggs had labeled his community liaison budget, a discretionary fund that paid for selective enforcement hours, overtime for officers willing to look the other way during freight nights, and equipment purchases that never quite made it into the department's official inventory. The second stream paid storage fees, truck rentals, and fuel costs for the smuggling operation itself. The third, the smallest but most telling, went to campaign donations funneled through a network of shell LLCs that all traced back to Travis Boone's construction company. Captain Owen Keating sat at the conference table, his Australian accent more pronounced when he was tired, reviewing the financial documents that Sheriff Redding's forensic accountant had extracted from Briggs's seized devices. 3 years of this, he said, shaking his head, and nobody in town thought to ask why the police chief was suddenly so interested in diner fundraisers. "People see what they want to see," Naomi replied, capping the marker. And Briggs was careful. The amounts were small, the paperwork looked legitimate, and anyone who asked questions got labeled a troublemaker. A knock at the door interrupted them. Pastor Leon Brooks entered, followed by a man Naomi recognized from the diner, the elderly regular who'd sat at the counter nursing coffee while Maddox had tried to eject her. Hank Delaney, 74, Vietnam veteran, wearing a battered John Deere cap and the uncomfortable expression of someone who'd come to confess. "Agent Walker," Pastor Brooks said, "Hank has something he needs to tell you." Hank removed his cap, worked it between weathered hands. "I've been going to that diner for 40 years, known Evelyn since she married Tom Pierce, watched her take over when he passed, and I knew about the members' nights. Hell, I was invited to join 3 years back." Naomi gestured to a chair. "Did you join?" "No, ma'am. Didn't sit right with me. All that talk about heritage and keeping things the way they were. I did my time in Vietnam. Saw what happens when people start sorting folks by skin color and deciding who deserves dignity. But I didn't speak up either. I just kept coming in for my coffee at 6 a.m. before the politics started and told myself it wasn't my business. I was wrong. It was my business. It's everybody's business when something like that's happening in your town." "What can you tell me about the members' nights?" Naomi asked, pulling out her recorder. "On the record." He nodded. "Started in October 2022, right after Briggs made chief. Evelyn announced it as a fundraiser for the Historical Society, said it was for preserving town heritage, maintaining the old buildings on Main Street. But everyone knew what heritage meant. It meant keeping Red Hollow the way it was in the 50s, before integration, before the world changed. They'd close the diner to the public, put up a private function sign, and only folks on the list got in. Did you ever witness anyone being turned away? Twice. First time was a black family passing through, tourists looking for dinner. Maddox was working the door that night. Told them they were closed for a private event, even though the lights were on and the parking lot was full. Second time was a Latino man, worked construction over in Beckley, stopped in for coffee. Same story, Maddox at the door, polite as poison, saying it was members only and they didn't take walk-ins on Tuesdays. Did anyone object? Say anything? Hank's voice dropped. No, ma'am. We all just looked at our plates and let it happen. Easier to pretend you didn't see it than to make waves and lose your coffee spot, lose your friends, lose your place in town. That's how it works, you see. Not with burning crosses, allowed hate, just with quiet exclusion and people like me who knew better but didn't do better. Pastor Brooks placed a hand on Hank's shoulder. You're doing better now. Naomi stopped the recording, labeled the file, and uploaded it to the case server. Mr. Delaney, your testimony is valuable. It establishes pattern in practice, shows this wasn't an isolated incident. Are you willing to testify in court if needed? Yes, ma'am. I figure it's the least I can do, maybe the only thing I can do to make up for 3 years of looking the other way. As Hank and Pastor Brooks left, Naomi returned to the whiteboard, adding his testimony to the timeline. The pattern was clear now, documented from multiple angles. The viral video, Ruby's footage, Aaron's body cam audio, and now eyewitness testimony from a town elder who'd finally chosen truth over comfort. Her phone buzzed. Mason Hale, the local podcaster who'd been documenting the case since the viral video dropped. She'd been wary of him at first, another voice amplifying outrage for clicks and downloads, but he'd surprised her by pivoting from hot takes to actual journalism, sourcing documents and conducting careful interviews instead of trafficking in rumor and grievance. The message included a link to a file-sharing service. Got something you need to see. Aaron Blake leaked it to me. Campaign finance records for Judge Whitaker's last election. Clean as a whistle, but look at her opponent's donors. Naomi downloaded the files and spread them across her laptop screen. Judge Whitaker's campaign had been modest, funded by small donations and her own savings. But her opponent, a lawyer named Carson, who'd run on a law and order platform, had received significant funding from a network of LLCs that Naomi now recognized as Boone's shell companies. He'd lost by 3 percentage points, a closer race than anyone had expected in a county that historically re-elected judges by comfortable margins. He tried to buy the bench, Keating said, reading over her shoulder, and when that didn't work, he tried to pressure her with Briggs's help. Another file in Mason's package. Text message screenshots between Chief Briggs and Officer Maddox, timestamp from the week before the diner incident. Briggs, Heritage Night Tuesday, make sure nobody interrupts. VIP freight coming through. Maddox, understood, I'll handle any problems. Briggs, good man, this stays between us. The messages established premeditation, show that Maddox hadn't acted on impulse or bias alone, but on direct orders from his chief to exclude outsiders and protect the smuggling operation. Combined with the body cam audio of the coached K-9 alert, the pattern of false stops documented in Archer's training logs, and the financial flows connecting everyone involved, the case had moved from strong to overwhelming. Naomi drafted a joint affidavit, synthesizing the evidence into a chronological narrative that a jury could follow from first dollar to last arrest. She included Ruby's roster photo, Aaron's body cam footage, Hank's testimony, the financial records, and the text messages, each piece reinforcing the others, each gap filled by overlapping documentation. Judge Whitaker's clerk called at 3 p.m. Her Honor has reviewed your updated filing. She's denying Chief Briggs's emergency motion to reclaim the evidence and issuing a spoliation warning. She's also requesting a meeting in chambers tomorrow morning. She has questions about the Heritage Fund's nonprofit status. We'll be there, Naomi said. By evening, the command room hummed with quiet activity.
Redding's deputies were running down the last of the Heritage Club members, serving them with notices to preserve documents and electronic communications. Pastor Brooks had expanded his witness protection network to include 3 families who'd reported harassment after speaking to investigators. Aaron Blake, living in a safe apartment coordinated by Brooks, had started training other young officers on what ethical policing actually looked like, turning her shame into a teaching moment for recruits who'd never been shown an alternative to the Maddox model. But not everyone had chosen courage over convenience. Online, a smear campaign against Naomi had gained traction in certain corners, anonymous accounts calling her an outside agitator, a diversity hire, a federal bully who didn't understand small-town values. The attacks were coordinated, the talking points identical across platforms, the funding invisible, but almost certainly traceable back to Boone's network if anyone had the time and resources to dig through the layers of anonymity. Naomi called Dr. Taryn Cooper, her friend and therapist, who answered on the second ring. "How are you holding up?" "I'm good, busy, focused." I paused. "They're saying I'm doing this for attention, that I'm making it about race when it's really about law and order." Classic Darvo. Deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. They can't defend what they did, so they attack who you are. You know this playbook. I do. It doesn't make it easier to read. It's not supposed to be easy, but you're not alone and you're not wrong. Keep doing the work. Let the documentation speak. And call me if you need to process any of this before it gets under your skin. Naomi thanked her and ended the call, feeling steadier. The work was the thing. The meticulous accumulation of evidence, the careful protection of witnesses, the steady dismantling of a network that had operated in plain sight for years. That was justice, not the performative outrage or the defensive counterattacks, but the patient, grinding work of holding people accountable through process and documentation.
Her phone buzzed again. "Ruby, they're planning something big tomorrow night. Fundraiser at the diner. Evelyn says it's to pay legal bills, but I heard Boone on the phone talking about one last delivery. I'm scared, but I'm coming to work. Someone needs to see what happens." Naomi stared at the message, feeling the weight of a 17-year-old girl choosing to walk into danger because the adults in her town had failed to protect her from having to make that choice. She typed back, "Do not put yourself at risk. We have enough. You've done more than enough." Ruby's response came immediately. "Someone has to witness. Isn't that what you've been teaching us? That silence is complicity?" Naomi closed her eyes, remembering a younger version of herself, 19 and angry, joining the army because she wanted to fight for something that mattered, wanted to be the kind of person who stood in the gap. Ruby was that person now, and all Naomi could do was make sure the girl survived her own courage. She turned to Keating. "We move tomorrow night, full operation, and we keep Ruby Lane safe, whatever it takes." Keating nodded. "I'll call Judge Whitaker. Time to authorize a covert entry if exigency arises." Outside, the sun was setting over Red Hollow, painting the river the color of old blood. Somewhere in town, Evelyn Pierce was making calls, Travis Boone was moving assets, and Officer Maddox was realizing that his badge wouldn't protect him anymore. The blue wall was buckling, stress fractures spreading from the point where Aaron Blake had chosen documentation over loyalty. And tomorrow night, when the Heritage fundraiser reached its crescendo, the whole corrupt structure would finally collapse under the weight of its own lies. Main Street looked like a stage set for competing narratives. On the north side, protesters held signs reading, "Racism isn't heritage," and "Federal law applies here," their voices rising in call-and-response chants that echoed off the brick storefronts. On the south side, counter-protesters waved flags and homemade banners declaring, "Support our police," and "Red Hollow strong," their own chants creating a discordant harmony that made the air vibrate with tension. Between them, a thin line of Sheriff Redding's deputies stood with linked arms, maintaining a corridor down the center of the street where pedestrians could pass without being pulled into either camp. Television crews from Charleston and Pittsburgh had set up on the courthouse steps, their lights turning the autumn dusk into artificial noon, reporters doing stand-ups with the divided town as backdrop. Inside the Pioneer Diner, Evelyn Pierce moved through her final preparations with the calm of someone who'd already accepted defeat, but refused to surrender without ceremony. She'd announced the Heritage fundraiser 3 days ago, framing it as a legal defense fund for officers accused of doing their jobs,
for small business owners persecuted by federal overreach, for a town under siege by outsiders who didn't understand their values. The tickets had sold out in hours, though whether people were buying solidarity or spectacle was anyone's guess. Ruby Lane tied her apron with shaking hands, checking her phone one last time before her shift started. Naomi's text from that morning was still on the screen. Panic button on your key fob. One press sends your location to everyone. You are not alone. Ruby had tested it twice in the parking lot, feeling the vibration that confirmed transmission, knowing that somewhere in the darkness federal agents were watching, waiting, ready to move if the night went sideways. She pocketed the phone and pushed through the kitchen doors into the dining room, where the tables had been rearranged to create a speakers area near the front windows. Evelyn had brought in a podium and a microphone, transforming the diner into a rally space, and the early arrivals were already claiming seats, their faces a mix of defiance, curiosity, and the hollow-eyed loyalty of people who'd invested too much in a story to abandon it even as the plot collapsed around them. Naomi watched from a rooftop across the street, binoculars in hand, radio earpiece connecting her to Keating's command post at the ranger station and Redding's mobile unit 3 blocks east. She dressed in black tactical gear, her badge hung on a chain beneath her shirt, her sidearm holstered but ready. Beside her, 2 Park Service investigators monitored thermal imaging and communication intercepts, tracking heat signatures inside the diner and scanning for encrypted radio traffic that might signal the freight delivery Ruby had warned about. Thermal shows 43 people inside. Kitchen area has elevated activity, possible backroom movement. She keyed her radio. Captain, we have significant foot traffic in the rear of the building. Recommend positioning units on the alley exit. Keating's voice crackled back, measured and Australian. Copy. Redding has 2 deputies moving into position now. Judge Whitaker signed the exigency order an hour ago. If they move freight, we're authorized to enter. Below, a black truck pulled into the alley behind the diner, its bed covered with a tarp. Naomi adjusted her binoculars, catching the license plate and running it through her database. Registered to one of Boone's shell companies, the same LLCs that had funded the campaign against Judge Whitaker and laundered the Heritage Fund donations. Travis Boone stepped out of the truck wearing a suit instead of his usual Carhartt jacket, performing respectability for the cameras and the crowd. He carried a metal case, brushed aluminum with reinforced corners, the kind used for transporting sensitive equipment or valuable cargo. He knocked twice on the back door and Evelyn's nephew appeared, glancing left and right before ushering Boone inside. Package delivered, Naomi reported. Metal case, hand-carried, moving to interior.
Inside the diner, Officer Cole Maddox arrived with Archer at his heel, still in uniform despite being on administrative leave pending the investigation into his conduct. The crowd applauded his entrance, some rising to shake his hand, treating him like a hero returned from unjust exile, rather than an officer caught on camera coaching a false canine alert and attempting an unlawful ejection based on race. Maddox soaked in the attention, his jaw set in that familiar expression of aggrieved righteousness, his hand resting on Archer's head, as though the dog's presence validated everything he'd done. But Archer seemed uncomfortable, his ears back, his body language uncertain, a living contradiction to the narrative Maddox was trying to sell. Ruby moved through the room with coffee refills, her eyes down, her movements mechanical. She heard fragments of conversation, pieces of the story this crowd was telling itself, that they were the real victims, that outside agitators had weaponized political correctness against good people trying to preserve their way of life, that Naomi Walker was a diversity hire with a grudge and federal backing, that the arrests were persecution and the evidence was manufactured. She caught Evelyn's eye across the room, and the older woman's expression was unreadable, somewhere between pity and warning. Ruby wondered if Evelyn knew she'd taken the original roster photo, if she suspected that the teenage waitress with the photography hobby had become the leak that turned whispers into evidence. The microphone squealed with feedback as Evelyn tapped it, calling the room to attention. Thank you all for coming tonight. We're here to support our officers, our businesses, and our right to preserve the heritage that makes Red Hollow special. We've been accused of terrible things by people who don't know us, don't live here, and don't understand what we're trying to protect. Applause rippled through the room, and Naomi felt her stomach tighten. This was the dangerous moment, when grievance became galvanizing, when a crowd convinced itself that exclusion was tradition and that accountability was persecution.
Evelyn continued, her voice honeyed and sharp. They say we're criminals. They say we're hateful. But all we've ever wanted is to keep our town the way our parents and grandparents knew it, to honor the past and resist the changes being forced on us by federal bureaucrats who think they know better than we do about our own home. Maddox stepped forward, accepting the microphone. I did my job that night. I enforced property rights and protected a private function. If that's a crime now, then we've lost something fundamental. We've lost the right to choose who we associate with, who we do business with, who belongs in our spaces. The crowd erupted in approval, but the sound was brittle, desperate, the kind of noise people make when they're trying to drown out doubt. Ruby's hand trembled as she poured coffee, and the cup rattled against the saucer. An older woman at the table noticed, reached up to steady her hand. "You okay, honey?" Ruby nodded, not trusting her voice. Outside, Naomi watched Boone emerge from the kitchen, no longer carrying the metal case. "Case is inside. Recommend we move." Keating's voice. "Stand by. Let's see what they're planning." Boone took the microphone from Maddox. "Folks, we've been through a lot this week. The Heritage Fund has been frozen, our records seized, good people arrested, but we're not done. Tonight we're making one last collection, one final push to fight this in court and show them that Red Hollow doesn't back down." He gestured to Evelyn's nephew, who brought out the metal case and opened it on a table near the podium. Inside, not cash or weapons, but USB drives and small encrypted radios, the kind used for coordination in operations that couldn't risk standard communications. "These are for our core members," Boone said. "Secure communications, document preservation. Everything they'll try to take from us we'll have backed up and protected. This isn't over." Naomi's blood ran cold. This wasn't a fundraiser, it was a conspiracy meeting, an evidence destruction coordination session, and they were documenting their own obstruction in real time. She keyed her radio. "Captain, we have exigent circumstances. They're distributing encrypted devices to facilitate ongoing criminal activity. We need to move now." "Copy. Redding, you're green. Execute the warrant." Sheriff Redding's voice, calm and final. "All units, converge on the Pioneer Diner. Federal warrant in effect. Secure all exits." In the crowd on Main Street, phones began buzzing with emergency alerts. The protesters and counter-protesters paused, confused, as sheriff's vehicles rolled up with lights dark but engines loud. Ruby felt her key fob vibrate in her pocket, the panic button she hadn't pressed, and realized someone else had triggered the operation. Aaron Blake stepped out of the lead vehicle, now in full deputy uniform, her face set with the expression of someone who'd already paid the cost of conscience and found it cheaper than the alternative. She approached the diner's front door, warrant in hand, and spoke clearly enough for the television cameras to capture every word. "This is Deputy Aaron Blake, County Sheriff's Office, executing a federal search warrant for these premises. All persons inside are required to remain in place and present identification. This is a lawful order." Inside, the diner erupted into chaos. Some people rushed for exits, others pulled out phones to film. Maddox grabbed for Archer's lead, but the dog pulled away, trotting toward the door and sitting calmly beside Aaron, as though recognizing something in him that he'd never found in his handler.
Ruby dropped her coffee pot, ignoring the ceramic explosion at her feet, and raised her own phone to film the moment when the lights came on, when the performance ended, when Red Hollow had to decide what it wanted to be when the cameras were watching. Naomi descended from the rooftop, moving through the crowd with her badge finally visible, no longer undercover, no longer watching from the margins. She entered the diner through the front door, and the room fell silent as people recognized her. The woman Maddox had tried to eject, the federal agent they'd dismissed as an outside agitator, now walking in with the full weight of law behind her. She approached the table where Boone had distributed the encrypted devices. "Travis Boone, you're under arrest for conspiracy to obstruct justice. These devices and all communications will be seized as evidence." Boone's folksy smile was gone, replaced by naked fury. "You're destroying this town." "No," Naomi said quietly. "You already did that. I'm just documenting what's left." As Redding's deputies began processing the scene, Ruby found herself standing next to Aaron, two young women who'd chosen witness over silence, courage over comfort. Their eyes met, and something passed between them.
an understanding that they'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, that they'd become the kind of people who testified instead of pretended, who chose truth even when tradition demanded loyalty. Outside, the protesters and counter-protesters had merged into a single confused crowd, the neat divisions collapsing as people tried to understand what they were witnessing, not a persecution, but a reckoning. Dawn came to Red Hollow with surprising gentleness, fog lifting off the river in lazy spirals, the autumn light turning everything soft and forgiving. Naomi watched from her truck, parked at the same spot where she'd stabilized herself after that first night at the diner, the place where she'd uploaded evidence and decided that precision would be her weapon instead of rage. The raids had rolled out in the pre-dawn hours with choreographed efficiency. Travis Boone at his river house, caught in pajamas and disbelief, the encrypted devices from the fundraiser already linked to his personal server. Chief Walter Briggs at his office, attempting to shred documents even as deputies walked through his door, the paper-choked machine serving as its own evidence of consciousness of guilt. And Officer Cole Maddox at his small rental house on the edge of town, with Archer lying at his feet, the dog's calm presence a stark contrast to his handler's mounting panic. Sheriff Redding had executed the warrants personally, his voice measured and professional, even as decades of institutional corruption collapsed into handcuffs and Miranda warnings. No drama, no spectacle, just the grinding machinery of accountability finally engaging after years of deliberate neglect. At the courthouse, Judge Marla Whitaker presided over the binding hearings with her characteristic cool precision, reading the evidence summaries without editorializing, letting the facts speak in their own damning language. When Maddox's attorney attempted to suppress the canine training recordings, arguing they were taken out of context, Whitaker had silenced him with a single raised hand. "Counselor, I've reviewed the complete audio. Your client can be heard clearly coaching this animal to false alert on 12 separate occasions over the past 18 months. That's not context, that's pattern. Motion denied." The courtroom had held its breath as Whitaker continued through the evidence. Aaron's body cam footage showing Maddox's illegal ejection attempt, Ruby's video documenting the same, Hank Delaney's testimony establishing years of discriminatory practice, the financial records linking Briggs's budget to Heritage Fund laundering, and the encrypted devices seized at the fundraiser with their communication logs still intact, showing coordination of evidence destruction across multiple members. Archer, present in the courtroom as physical evidence, had sat quietly beside a Park Service canine handler who'd been assigned temporary custody. When the training audio played, the dog's ears went back, a visible flinch at the sound of Maddox's voice commanding him to perform false alerts. The jury pool, watching from the gallery, had seen it too, that moment when even the dog testified against his handler. Judge Whitaker bound all three men over for trial, denied bail for Boone based on flight risk, and set strict conditions for Briggs and Maddox that included surrendering their passports and wearing ankle monitors. She also ordered a special master to review every case in Red Hollow PD's history where Archer had been used for probable cause, a decision that would ultimately result in 73 convictions being overturned and dozens of people released from prison or having their records cleared. "This court recognizes," she said, her voice carrying to the back of the room, "that justice delayed is justice denied, but justice that relies on manufactured evidence is not justice at all. It's tyranny in uniform." The words would be quoted in newspapers from Charleston to Washington, a soundbite that captured the moment when a small-town judge chose principle over political survival. At the community house, Pastor Leon Brooks moved through his expanded witness protection network with the efficiency of a field commander and the gentleness of a chaplain. 3 families who'd reported harassment after cooperating with investigators now had safe housing and legal representation. Ruby Lane had a full scholarship fund, donations pouring in from across the country after her video and her courage became national news.
Erin Blake was enrolled in an accelerated training program for ethical law enforcement practices, her testimony already being used as a case study in police academies teaching the cost of complicity and the value of documentation.
"You saved lives," Brooks told Erin during a quiet moment in the fellowship hall. "Not just Ruby's, not just the people falsely convicted, but your own. Silence was killing you from the inside. Now you can breathe." Erin nodded, her eyes still carrying the weight of what she'd lost. Friends who wouldn't speak to her, colleagues who called her a traitor, a town that would never fully forgive her for choosing principle over tribe. But she was sleeping through the night now, without the nightmares of Maddox's voice coaching lies, without the shame of standing silent while injustice wore a badge. Mason Hale published his final long-form episode on the case, centering the voices of Ruby, Erin, and Hank, the three generations who'd chosen truth over comfort. His podcast had evolved from small-town gossip to actual journalism, his audience growing as his commitment to documentation replaced his appetite for outrage. "This is a story about belonging," he narrated in his conclusion, "about who gets to decide who belongs and what happens when that power is given to people who confuse tradition with exclusion, heritage with hate." Red Hollow is learning, slowly and painfully, that belonging isn't something you can ration or weaponize. It's something you build together, or you don't build at all. The episode went viral, shared across social media platforms with the same velocity as Ruby's original video. But this time, the narrative was complete, the arc from provocation to accountability fully documented. Evelyn Pierce sat in her attorney's office, her smile finally and permanently gone, facing charges of money laundering, conspiracy, and operating a continuing criminal enterprise. The diner had been seized as the proceeds of crime, its future uncertain, though Pastor Brooks was quietly working on a cooperative purchase that would transform it into a community kitchen and job training center. "You could have just served coffee. You could have run an honest business." "Honest doesn't pay the bills," Evelyn replied, her voice flat. "Honest doesn't keep the lights on when the factory closes and the young people leave and all you have left is nostalgia and resentment." It was the most honest thing she'd said in years, an admission that the Heritage Club had never been about preserving anything worth preserving, just monetizing grievance and gatekeeping dignity. At the ranger station, Captain Owen Keating briefed Naomi on a new case. Another small town, 2 counties over, where similar patterns had emerged. Another diner with members' nights, another Heritage Club funneling money through non-profit shells. "This was a pipeline," Keating said, spreading files across the table. "Red Hollow wasn't the beginning or the end. It was a franchise model, tested and refined, exported to towns where economic anxiety and demographic change created the perfect conditions for exploitation dressed as tradition." Naomi studied the files, seeing the same patterns she just dismantled, the same playbook running in a different location. "How many?" "We've identified 7 similar operations across 3 states. Could be more. The Heritage Club wasn't a local phenomenon. It was a network." Naomi felt the weight of maintenance work settling on her shoulders again. The knowledge that this case, this town, this victory, was just one node in a larger system that would require years of patient documentation and careful prosecution to fully dismantle. But she also felt something else, the knowledge that they'd proven it could be done. That a viral video, plus brave witnesses, plus meticulous documentation could crack open even a well-protected conspiracy. That ordinary people, a waitress and a deputy and a stubborn old man, could choose courage and survive the choosing. She picked up a smooth river stone from her desk, a piece of the Red Hollow riverbank she'd pocketed during an early morning walk, and turned it over in her hands. River teeth, she thought. Ancient, preserved, a record of seasons long past. Some people try to steal that history, to commodify it, to turn it into chips in a game of exclusion and profit. But others, like Ruby and Erin and Hank, chose to be witnesses instead of thieves, chose to preserve by testifying, chose belonging over gatekeeping. She pocketed the stone and stood. "When do we start on the next one?" Keating smiled, his Australian accent warm with approval. "Tomorrow. But today, you rest. You've earned it." Naomi drove through Red Hollow one last time, past the courthouse where Whitaker had held the line,
past the community house where Brooks was building a different kind of heritage, past the diner that would soon become something new. The protesters were gone, the television trucks departed, leaving only the town itself to reckon with what it had been and decide what it wanted to become. At the town line, she passed a new sign, hand-painted and still drying. Red Hollow, all are welcome. Someone had planted it overnight, an act of hope or defiance, or both. In her rearview mirror, the river caught the morning light, running clean and constant, carrying away what needed to go and leaving behind what mattered. The work was maintenance, not victory, but maintenance mattered. Every pipeline closed, every witness protected, every choice for courage over comfort was a stone added to a foundation that might, eventually, hold. Naomi pointed her truck toward the next town, the next case, the next opportunity to document that belonging couldn't be bought or sold or rationed, only built together, one choice at a time, one voice at a time, one moment of courage that rippled outward until the whole river changed its course. She turned on the radio, rolled down her window, and drove into the morning, leaving Red Hollow stronger than she'd found it, carrying its lessons forward like smooth stones in her pocket, proof that even the hardest things can be shaped by patience and water and time.
Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.